Welcome to the Index Insights podcast, where we explore the trends shaping global markets. I'm your host, Rahul Sen Sharma, and today we're diving into a transformative theme, artificial intelligence in indexing. From data to design, AI is redefining how indices are built, making them smarter, faster, and more adaptive to today's dynamic markets. Joining me today are two distinguished guests who bring unique perspectives on innovation, indexing, and AI. First, Vaibhav Agarwal, Chief Product Officer at Indxx. With nearly a decade of experience in indexing, from Deutsche Bank and Morningstar indexes to leading product development here at Indxx, Vaibhav has been instrumental in developing innovative index solutions across asset classes. He's a CFA charter holder, holds the CIPM certificate, and is an alumnus of IIT Delhi and IIM Indore, so reasonably intelligent fellow. Joining us as well is Kamal Aggarwal, founder and CEO of Ravino AI, a vertical AI company building Gen AI-based solutions for institutional finance and insurance. Kamal is a three-time entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience across semiconductor, automotive, and financial services domains. He has spearheaded the creation of cutting-edge software platforms that harness AI and advanced data analytics. Vaibhav, great to have you on the show again. And Kamal, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thanks for having me.
Vaibhav, let's start with you. Over the years, indices have evolved from being simple market barometers to highly sophisticated thematic investment tools and more. Maybe we could start by talking about how that evolution has unfolded and what's driving it today.
Sure, Rahul. I think we have to start a little bit going back to about 60s and 70s when the whole passive investment wave actually started with the early indexes that were traditional market cap weighted, what we today call benchmarks. And that wave lasted for about 20, 30 years, and it's still going on. I mean, the benchmarks are here to stay. They still track the highest AUM of all the passive products in the market. But towards late 90s and early 2000s is when the second phase of passive investments or indexing started, which we know was the factor wave, wherein you had the size, the pharma French factors, the 5-factor models and whatnot, and multiple risk models coming in. And that wave also sort of went away in mid of 2010s, which is when the whole thematic wave started. And we're proud to be one of the pioneers of that wave at Indxx. And that was where the themes actually cut across sectors. And so we had to be intelligent about it, how to make, for instance, at that point, a robotics index, include companies which derive more than 50% of their revenue from the theme itself, which in this case was robotics. And so that wave is still going on, but it has evolved now, or I would say it has matured to a stage where it's now getting a little bit more complex, for the lack of a better word, wherein you need to have more data. Just the revenue participation does not work. And you need to be very intelligent about creating some of these very nascent novice themes that are upcoming, like the AI theme, which we're going to speak about in a while, and also some of the very, very, what we call offshoots of larger themes like the robo-taxis of the world. And so I think the evolution, where we stand today in terms of evolution is, yes, thematic investing is here to stay, but it's getting more intelligent. And that is why we thought this is the most opportune time of working with Kamal and integrating AI in not just our product development, as we'll talk about, but also across all our processes, for everything indexing that we do.
Fascinating. So actually, that's a good segue to you, Kamal. Mm-hmm. Let's shift over to you.
Yeah.
When people hear AI and indexing, it can sound very futuristic and a little bit almost like black box and vague.
Right.
How would you define it for our viewers in simple terms?
Sure. So in terms of index product development, right? So when we talk about using AI, is essentially using what I call intelligent information processing, right? So we're using AI essentially to mine data, which is unconventional sources of data. Traditionally, when you're building an index, you're looking at essentially structured financial data, like revenues, or market cap, or even industry classification. But often at times we are seeing that a lot of valuable information is hidden in unstructured data, like company disclosures, SEC filings, and things like that. And so when we talk about AI indexing, it's basically leveraging AI to really mine this unstructured data for signals that we can then use to essentially construct an index. So that's what I would define it in very simple terms, how we're using AI.
So it's actually using publicly available sources that are verified to come up with the data sets.
True. So it's essentially about looking beyond the conventional set of data that typically index product developers are using to use more, broader set of data, right? Where those hidden signals or more forward-looking signals may lie, but do it in a manner which is, of course, within the parameters of a systematic methodology, right? So, and we'll talk about a little bit more.
That's a great introduction. Thanks for that, because I, for one, when we started this journey, didn't really understand the difference between structured and unstructured data. So your explanation makes it very clear that it's still data. It's just not in a structured manner, like, for example, a balance sheet or a statement of cash flows.
Absolutely.
So actually, that would be a good segue now to the next question. And this is somewhat rhetorical, but I think given your response, it is sort of clear. But what inspired us here at Indxx to integrate AI into index construction, and what gap did you see in traditional indexing methods that this type of approach would solve?
Yeah. So just double clicking on the same idea I talked about, like traditionally we would typically use these structured data sources, right? But when we are constructing certain indices, and specifically the index we're going to talk about is US manufacturing, the real motivation is the data gap, right? If you want to build an index which is following a theme for which the signal is not available in traditional structured data sources, to build that index, you need to go outside that and look at unstructured data sources. And I think that's where we saw an opportunity of leveraging AI, because to do it manually would mean an analyst going through reams of documents and manually pouring through them and understanding them and comprehending them and creating signals out of it. Think of AI as like analyst co-pilot, which is reading thousands and thousands of pages of information and getting that signal for us, which we could use as part of the index development. So bridging that data gap was the motivation for us to use it.
So it's almost like using a team of analysts to do tens of thousands of man hours of work.
Absolutely.
And arriving at the same conclusion that the human would from a data perspective and a quantitative perspective, but doing it much more efficiently.
More efficiently and hopefully more objectively as well.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add, it's not just a replacement for an analyst. It's something that even 10,000 analysts might not be able to do. So at Indxx, what you're trying to do using AI is not create indices that can be created without AI, but we're trying to create indices that almost cannot be created without AI or without algorithms that we don't have ready access to, for instance, in the indexing world. And data is, yes, as Kamal mentioned, data is a big sort of bridge that we're trying to cross using AI. But as we'll explain later on in this session, we're also exploring how do we use AI for other parts of product development, so portfolio constructions, portfolio analytics, and so on and so forth. So yes, I completely agree with Kamal that we're trying to bridge that data gap presently with the index that we are discussing. But I think it's a lot more than a simple human replacement, and in some aspects.
Okay. Well, Kamal, let's get a little bit more into the details here. How exactly are we utilizing AI to transform the index design? What makes it more dynamic? What makes it more adaptive? What makes it more forward-looking, more accurate and more targeted, really, than conventional models? Because that's really what we're doing here.
Yeah,
right?
Sure. So let's maybe talk in the context of a specific example, like a US manufacturing index, contrasting with traditional ways in which we would construct an index where we would look at numbers, financial metrics, revenue, market cap, and so on, which are traditionally, I would say, backward looking. Here, what we're trying to do is to look for signals in information like company disclosures, SEC filings, market information, press releases, and things like that, and mining signals which are more forward-looking. So let's say in the context of a US manufacturing index, we are trying to identify companies who are manufacturing in US and have intent, quantifiable intent to manufacture more in the US. Now, such type of information basically is lying in those unstructured data sources like disclosures, And AI is essentially looking for that information, scoring that information, transforming that unstructured data into structured signals, which we can use to score companies. So we are essentially then combining both the structured data signals and the unstructured data signals to create this kind of a combined signal about a company, which is more focused on the theme that we're trying to construct the index for. So we can, I would say, AI is helping us put a more sharper lens on each company to really sift out which company is following a particular theme, like in this case, US manufacturing.
So maybe just for our viewers, can you give us some examples of structured and unstructured data that you're utilizing for this index? Of course, we'll get into the methodology later on, but just as a starting point, maybe you can do that?
Sure. So, for example, anything related to financials of the company, which companies report, would quantify as structured information. This could be revenues. In case of US manufacturing index, we're talking about capital expenditure that the company has done, market cap of the company, things like that. This is typically available through structured financial data feeds. Unstructured data is, as I said, we're looking for intent or stated disclosures by company management about their intention to bring back manufacturing into the US. This is unstructured data. And essentially, we are using AI to read through these filings, to comprehend that, and create some kind of unstructured data from this unstructured data, right? So, for example, a company is talking about both two companies, let's say two companies have in the same sector and have similar capital expenditure, but they may have very different strategy when it comes to expanding manufacturing. One company may be expanding more in the US, while the other may be doing outside the US. Such type of disclosures are typically done as words or sentences in management's commentary or some sentences in the SEC filing, right? And that's a very good example of an unstructured data source, which we're trying to understand and use that as a signal to differentiate between the two companies. So the company which is obviously having intent to bring back manufacturing into the US would qualify for our index versus another company which will not, even though from a structured data perspective, both are the same.
So from an unstructured data perspective, a good example there could be one company might say in its financial statements, we are planning to spend X billion dollars to open a manufacturing plant in South Carolina.
Right.
Whereas another company might say we're spending X billion dollars to open up a manufacturing plant overseas.
Yes.
Obviously, one is relevant for our US manufacturing index and the other one is not.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's where I think AI plays a big role in understanding these nuances in the unstructured data and do it at scale.
Well, I think that's a good time to pivot to you, Vaibhav. What makes our US manufacturing index, which is the first index that we built with Kamal's firm, what makes it unique and what really motivated us here at Indxx to use AI to enhance this index? I mean, why couldn't we do it without AI, for example?
Good question, Rahul. I think ours is not the first US manufacturing index that's out there. There have been more than a couple, and there have been a few ETFs also tracking this theme. And we went through all those methodologies, and we saw how those were created, and it just didn't sit well with us in terms of the proxies that were used for US manufacturing were not close enough proxies, and we could sense why that was so, because when we did our research, we found that there is absolutely no way to get a systematic data in a systematic form that tells you that X amount of production for a company comes from the US and Y comes outside the US. And you wouldn't believe, but we gleaned through, we discussed 10,000 analysts. We didn't have 10,000 analysts, but we did glean through multiple reports, multiple filings, and there was no data available that could definitively tell us that, okay, this company should be in a US manufacturing index because it manufactures this amount of its goods in US, and this one should not be. And we thought, why not work with Kamal's team to identify whether we can do this using AI, whether we can glean unstructured data and see if we can get much closer proxies than US manufacturing, other US manufacturing indices, or whether we can get directly the manufacturing data. And luckily, through Kamal's firm, we were able to actually get both. We were actually able to get current manufacturing, as Kamal alluded to, and we were also able to get manufacturing intent for companies that presently don't manufacture in US, but have announced plans, for instance, to manufacture in US. And that blended approach sort of is what we have in this index. And I think that is why this is a better mousetrap to capture the US manufacturing theme, which is big right now, as we can understand, with the whole geopolitical environment around bringing production back to US. And so I think AI was it was the right fit for this particular index, and that's why we selected to work on this one.
So that's really fascinating. What you're saying is that our approach initially and the other indexes that are out there that target US manufacturing essentially only use structured data. And the problem with that is obviously you're not really targeting the theme as effectively as you can. And Kamal's firm, using unstructured data, has allowed us to build, and we'll come back to it obviously, a more targeted, more accurate US manufacturing index that really targets companies that are focused on bringing manufacturing back or growing their manufacturing presence here in the US. Is that a fair statement?
That's a very fair statement. I would just add on to that and say that the current indexes that are out there in this space not just only use structured data, but the structured data that they're using or the proxies they're using for US manufacture through structured data sources is also very different from the structured data sources that we have used. So our index uses both structured and unstructured data, both powered by AI. But as we'll see, the data that we've used or the parameters that we've used are much closer to US manufacturing as proxies than the ones that are available in the in our competitor indexes.
Okay, well, let's come back to that. Let's also come back to, of course, the opportunity in US manufacturing in terms of size and expected growth. But before we do that, Kamal, maybe you could just lay the groundwork and just talk about on the technical side, what types of AI models are being used in the development of this index, and how do you ensure the accuracy amid data variability, for example?
Sure. That's an important question. So what we do from a technology point of view is use a pipeline based upon large language models, a technique called retrieval augmented generation or RAG technique, which essentially uses large language models for their language comprehension, reasoning capabilities, but feed them the context coming from very, very curated, trusted data sources, right? So in this case, for example, when we're mining unstructured data, we're looking at SEC filings of the companies, we're looking at press releases, so sources of information that are trusted data sources, and essentially using then large language models through prompt-based techniques to identify a specific signal. In a sense, as I mentioned before, transforming that unstructured data into something which we are looking for. In this case, US manufacturing expansion signal, which are the companies who have presence in US in respect to manufacturing and have stated goal as well as intent of expanding that manufacturing, right? And the key here is to do it in a manner which is both explainable and auditable. So AI is not being used as a black box, but every information that is processed by AI and AI creates a signal, we can relate it back to the data source for audit purpose. And also it's explainable. So AI can give rationale of why it scored a particular company on a particular signal higher than another company. And that rationale can be reviewed by a human, right? So in a way, we're using the scale of AI, but balancing it with, I would say, human in the loop and human oversight, which is how we think it's important to do in the financial industry.
That's fascinating. So you're saying the AI is doing a lot of this heavy lifting and processing massive amounts of data, and what it comes out with in terms of an output is fully, basically auditable and trackable back to the sources.
Yes.
I think that's very important for any type of index, obviously. Many regulators around the world, when you're launching a product, are very concerned about that. So I think that really solved a big pain point when we started showing this out there to potential issuers, is that there is a verifiable, quantifiable audit trail as well. So Vaibhav, let's pivot now to actually US manufacturing from a big picture perspective. And before we get into the index, I did some research into the US manufacturing in general. It's basically $3 trillion of the current US economy and around 10% of GDP. Is that why you selected this as kind of the first AI-enhanced index for us to try and develop? And also, from a bigger picture perspective, what's really fueling this resurgence, and how did it influence how the index has been designed?
You mentioned those numbers. I think that's one aspect of why we picked this index, or why we picked to work on this index. That's not the only reason why US manufacturing is big today. I think it actually goes back to the 2008 crisis, when the talks of decoupling global economies, or deglobalization as we like to call it, actually started, and it just panned across administrations here in the US. So it's a much larger context than just the top line headline numbers of contribution to GDPs. If you look at the trade imbalances that US currently has, and that uh, you know both sides of the aisle are trying to bridge. It's huge. Look at the pharma sector, look at the semiconductor sector. There are huge trade imbalances that we're trying to bridge. And so that's one factor that's driving this whole US manufacturing surge, bringing production back into US, nearshoring, reshoring, things like that. Another aspect is the technology that's driving these production processes back into the US. I think it would be fair to say that US is one of the leading technology countries in the world, whether it comes to supply chain, whether it comes to logistics, whether it comes to manufacturing. I think they're leading the AI race as well here in the US. So a lot of manufacturing bringing production back to the US will be driven by these technological advancements as well. And then if you look at either of the administrations, I know what's happening in the current, we all know what's happening in the current administration, but actually if you go back to the previous administration and you look at the kind of laws that were passed, the CHIPS Act, the IRAs, they were all in a sense to bring more manufacturing either inside the US or near to the US. So I think there are multiple factors at play here. There's a geopolitical angle to it. There is, of course, the whole US nearshoring angle to it, on why production lines should be near to the US, and there is a whole trade angle to it as well that's driving this, and that's what influenced our selection of this theme as the first index that we wanted to work, or integrate AI with. Of course, I've already mentioned why this was, from a data perspective, why this was a prime candidate, but there are other factors that we thought made this a very suitable candidate in the present climate to go out to the market with.
It does seem like this is one of those rare areas of bipartisan consensus in American politics today, where, of course, there are differences of opinion with regard to what types of sectors or industries should be encouraged here in the U.S. But regardless, across the political aisle, it seems like reshoring, U.S. manufacturing are things that both sides agree with. Perhaps it's just because, not only because of bringing jobs back, but also, subsidies and other types of things too.
Yeah.
So there are perhaps ulterior motives to it as well.
And our internal research actually shows that it's because it's prevalent across both sides of the aisle, it's going to last. It's more long term than people currently expect. Our research shows that because of what's happened in the Obama administration, followed by the first Trump administration, then the Biden era, and now again the Trump administration, is that across administrations they've stuck to some kind of deglobalization, as we like to call it, and bringing jobs back, as you mentioned, or bringing manufacturing back into the US or near the US. I think so. We feel, and our research shows, that this is more long-term in nature as well, and that's one of the other reasons why we picked this theme.
So how has all this influenced how you've built the index methodology?
Right. So, good question again, and that's a good next question to our my earlier answer. In that, I talked about trade imbalances. I talked about the economic value add. Kamal talked about how companies are expanding their production capacities or building on existing capacities, and building new production facilities. If they're hiring more in the US with AI, the hiring is in sort of a flux. I think there's more to do there than more layoffs than hiring presently, as we've seen the news items recently. But there's a multitude of factors that we've considered like these to build this index. It's more a two-layered approach that we've followed here. So there's a sector level approach, and then there is a company level approach. And we have done this intentionally because there are certain sectors that are very amenable to US manufacturing themselves, like the pharma sector or the semiconductor, which is more macro perspective. There are more macro tailwinds to that drive, that are behind the sector momentum score that we call. And then within the sectors, there are certain companies that are doing more to bring production back into the US than others. So there's a sector momentum score, and then within the sectors, there's a company score. And we blend both the scores together to get a combined score which drives our selection process. Now, why we did it this way was because we did not want to penalize any company just because it came from a sector which had a lower score. And that's why we wanted to follow the blended score approach. There are quite a few examples we came across where individual companies actually rank high on our parameters, but they would have been excluded if we had followed a sector sort of exclusion approach. So we thought a blended approach actually works best because there are macro tailwinds and there are micro tailwinds. And we did want to consider both when constructing this index to give the best solution that's possible.
That's really helpful and fascinating from both of you. Thank you. Let's pivot a little bit now and talk about how you see, beyond manufacturing now, AI shaping thematic indexing across various themes and sectors, for example, globally.
As I mentioned earlier in one of my responses, we don't want to use AI where AI is not needed. We want to work on concepts that are not creatable, if that's a word, by humans or by the traditional indexing methods that we've been using thus far. How we are working with Kamal and his team is first identify concepts that we really think make sense in today's world, and then try to see if there is data out there, if those can be built using the usual rules of portfolio construction, and if they can be, we don't integrate AI into those. So as of today, what we're working on with Kamal is identifying, as Kamal mentioned, some signals that are not available out there. They could be in unstructured format, or they could just not be out there, and we have to use data that is available, but we have to translate that into signals, which cannot be done using traditional models. So we need to integrate AI into those, and capture those signals, and then drive selection through those signals, drive weighting through those signals, or even performance optimization using those signals. And that's where I think the next wave of indexing is actually going to be. And I'm happy to tell our viewers that we are almost leading that race again in terms of integrating signal generation through AI, what I like to call, and then fitting that into indexing. So giving out themes is a little difficult, because when we talk about themes, they could be created in ways without using AI. But what we're using AI for is whether a theme can be made better using AI. Mm-hmm. And that's what we've done with US manufacturing, and that's what we are trying to do on more concepts with Kamal and his team. Kamal, do you want to add?
Yeah, just to add on to what Vaibhav said, think of this way, right? Things which are difficult to process using structured data or just not available, those signals are not available. I could pick some examples like innovation, right? Sentiment, those are things which change, they're very variable, and typically would require you to look at information sources which are non-traditional. You would look at, information in documents and disclosures and things like that. So those type of, I would say, themes where you're trying to look for forward-looking signal which has not yet appeared in the revenues, it is not visible in the numbers. Those type of signals, if you're trying to mine, you necessarily need to look at intent of the management. You have to look at action of the management, which is typically captured in this unstructured information. And that's where I think that's one of the places where AI would probably shine.
So that's what's next, is what you're hinting at. Those two areas and more. Things that are new, things that you could not access before, or things that are better targeted.
And they're evolving, things which are evolving, which have not yet appeared. So that's, we think, is AI gives us that advantage to really look for themes which are more forward-looking and emerging rather than already visible in the.
So do you have to use the same framework that's already been built and utilized now for US manufacturing? Or is this a flexible framework that you can use in different ways?
There are certain parts to the pipeline that we will definitely reuse as we build more products. But the goal here is to apply the right tool for the right index that we're trying to build. So that would require certain customizations and changes to the pipeline. The type of data sources we are doing, the type of signals that we're extracting would mean we tailor our AI pipeline or tune that pipeline to extract that signal more closely or more truthfully. So those type of customizations will definitely be.
So how are you using Gen AI to target this opportunity specifically, given the massive volumes of data that are out there that are unstructured?
Sure. So, Gen AI is definitely a step up in terms of AI technology. Traditionally, people have used natural language processing based AI. Gen AI allows us to essentially understand the sentiment or the action or intent behind a certain sentence or a disclosure much more accurately. So, for example, in the context of U.S. manufacturing, there could be a company which says that they have intent of bringing back manufacturing to U.S. versus another company which has a more definitive intent in terms of spending $2 billion, let's say, to start a new manufacturing capacity in Texas. Gen AI allows us to, understand and differentiate the nuance, understand that one disclosure is a lot more, quantifiable, it's more definitive, versus the other disclosure, which is more like an intent. And that can help us to, score the two companies differently. So think of Gen AI as a sharper tool to essentially, understand unstructured data to also control how the AI works.
So it's basically a next generation ahead of
Absolutely.
NLP, for example.
Absolutely.
Okay, fascinating. Vaibhav, last question to you. How would you describe the future of indexing in the age of AI? Because there's been a lot of talk out there about whether AI renders the indexing industry irrelevant or whether it makes it even more important because it allows for better targeting. What is your opinion there? I understand, of course, you have a vested interest as an index provider, but as impartially as you can, what are your thoughts on that?
No, Rahul, that's a very good final question. And I think there's a bit of hysteria and fear going around with AI in general, not pertaining to just the indexing industry, that it's going to cause a massive loss of jobs and it's going to cause massive closure of some of the industries and so on and so forth. From what I have understood so far working with Kamal on this first product and learning about AI in general is, yes, AI is here to stay. Yes, more index providers will adopt it. Not just index providers, but across the board in financial services, we'll see greater adoption happening. But I think the hysteria is a little misplaced. We're not going away. The indexing industry is not going away. This is not the first sort of inflection point that we've had in this industry or in the broader asset management industry in the past decades. And this won't be the last. Yes, AI is a very useful tool. Yes, AI will help us get more data. You're talking about future of indexing, right? It will get us, as Kamal alluded to earlier, it will get us data sets that are not non-existent presently in a more systematic fashion. It will be used to optimize for performance. It will be used for predictive analytics, and we will use it at Indxx as well. It will also be integrated into not just portfolio construction, but across different verticals within indexing when it comes to operations, review management, or even sales life cycles. So I think we're in a very good spot with AI to actually catapult ourselves to the next level of indexing and not be threatened by it. So I think from what you'll see at Indxx, from what you'll see coming out of Indxx next are a lot more ideas. We are also planning to see how we can integrate AI into our thematic classification system, the ITIC system, and in our operations processes. So I think we're in a very comfortable space right now. A lot of the hysteria, as I said, is misplaced, and I really look forward to integrating more and more AI into building new products with Kamal and his team.
Yeah, this is oftentimes what you see with the new technology.
Yeah.
There's a lot of initial hype and hysteria and fear.
Yeah.
And then when that kind of goes away, that's when the real hard work begins. And it takes a long time. I mean, you look at blockchain technology, for example. There was a huge amount of hype on that in 2017. And then that hype kind of went away, but that didn't stop the story from happening and didn't stop blockchain technology from being integrated. Yeah.
It still exists.
And it's growing rapidly.
Yeah, it's good. It's powering a lot more than it used to a couple of years back.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, the theoretical underpinning and the value of that technology was legitimate, just as it is with this. And it's now just trying to figure out the capitalistic, profitable use cases for it in this sense as well.
Yeah. And I will echo Vaibhav. I mean, our goal with AI is not basically replacing index developers. I think it just empowers them. It empowers Vaibhav and his team to think more boldly, look at more wider data, and essentially accelerate the process of creating more innovative indices, right? That's where the role of AI fits in.
So we don't have to worry about becoming batteries in the matrix anytime soon.
It's almost. I mean, this got shot down by our marketing team, and you know about it. I actually wanted to use the term artificial intellidexing in most of our marketing materials or collateral out there. But I think it's in some way. I mean, jokes apart. But I think in some ways, what we're trying to do with AI is actually using our intelligence to build those models, and then using the model's own intelligent capabilities to sort of power indexing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's how it's going to be adopted in most of the industries as well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for a wonderful conversation. Kamal, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your insights on how we utilized AI as well as how AI works in general. And Vaibhav, it's always a pleasure having you on to give your thoughts on the index and the index methodology side as well.
Thanks, Rahul. Yeah.
And that's it for this episode of Indxx Insights. If you found this conversation useful, do share it with your network and follow us for more perspectives on global markets and trends. Until then, stay sharp, stay informed.